It's quite simple, yet we've overcomplicated it. Just eat actual food, real food, single ingredient, organic, whole food. Get the food, the single ingredients, and make something in your kitchen. It's nourishing your mental and emotional health to enjoy something that's delicious or cook with your family. Like support myself at the most foundational level by preparing food for myself. But I'm also gonna like lose the weight, get healthier, feel better, like a meditative therapeutic time.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson. Today I'm joined by Jeanine Kutil, holistic nutritionist, amateur chef, Qigong instructor, and health coach. Jeanine's method is rooted in the principles of ancestral living, and she takes a whole mind-body approach with her clients. Her coaching programs focus on 6 pillars of wellness that encompass physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Jeanine struggled with her own health challenges and found her way to vibrant health, resiliency, and balanced lifestyle. In today's conversation, we're talking about using whole, real food as a major step toward healing. Jeanine gives us tips and pointers on how to get started changing our relationship with food so that we can nourish and treat ourselves at the same time. Jeanine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you having me on.
It is my pleasure, and I know listeners are excited to hear what you have to say. I would love for the audience just to get to know you a little bit by hearing a portion of your story. I'm sure there we could talk a lot about story, but how did you get into holistic nutrition and health coaching and all of the healthy, wonderful things you focus on?
Yeah, definitely. So I was certainly not living this way a few years ago. I was living in New York up until 2021. Before that, I lived in Boston. I grew up in Massachusetts. And I was living like your typical fast-paced New York lifestyle. I was working a lot. I was going out a lot. I was drinking a lot, partying a lot, working out, just like not getting good sleep. And just, I thrived really. I felt off of kind of a high intensity lifestyle and like a more high pressure job. And I just like had always sort of been in that headspace where I was constantly going. And I suddenly, out of nowhere, got like a bunch of symptoms. I had always been healthy. I'd never had any like chronic disease or diagnosis. I wasn't taking any medication. So it was really out of nowhere. I started experiencing like a whole plethora of symptoms, like neurological symptoms mostly. And I would call like neurological autoimmune symptoms, things like chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic dizziness, vertigo, headaches, like really bad migraines every few days, ringing in my ears, like numbness in different parts of my body. It was brutal. It was like very intense, gut issues. So yeah, I didn't know what was wrong. So of course I went to every doctor that I could find.
Sure.
And I ended up going to like 15 conventional medicine doctors in total, between, general practitioners and then like specialists. And I really didn't get any concrete answers. I got some diagnoses along the lines of like long COVID, maybe of chronic Lyme disease, but never anything firm, like maybe this, maybe that. Right.
Right.
And so I moved, I came and stayed with my mom because I needed to get out of New York, and I couldn't maintain like the lifestyle that I was living there by any means. And I just didn't feel like it was, conducive to my healing to try and be like getting on the subway to go to a doctor's appointment, and then like kind of the isolation that you feel in New York too. And you want to be with family, when you're sick.
Yeah.
So then I moved to Charleston and I started seeing more like functional medicine practitioners. I've been blessed in the sense that while I always saw, conventional doctors and always believed in, that sort of allopathic form of medicine, that my upbringing, my mom was like pretty into alternative medicine. She's a lifelong yoga teacher, meditator.
Nice.
So I kind of grew up around that community too. So like one of her best friends is a Chinese medicine doctor, acupuncturist, craniosacral therapy. Like I did Reiki when I was like a teenager. So I kind of already knew a little bit about that world. So just started exploring that space. And I had also always been really into food. Like I could always eat anything I wanted to, but I love to cook. And so I did use, diet on my own, experimenting with different types of diet. And just kind of, I felt like when I was in the kitchen and I was making something that like, it's always been very therapeutic for me. And when I was really sick, it continued to be sort of like a safe space where I could turn my mind off a little bit. And focus on what I was, making. So I ended up doing like a ton of modalities. I won't go into details, but the things that helped me the most were like nervous system based work, mind body connection, like trauma based therapy, talk therapy, and then diet for sure, anti-inflammatory diets, removing gluten, dairy, refined sugars, things like that. And then herbalism, which I did with a Tibetan medicine doctor. So yeah, kind of a little bit of like each thing, because my philosophy is that, I mean, you can certainly, there's a lot of cases, right, where like someone has like one root cause, and if you kind of just like can tweak that one thing.
Are there?
But right, exactly. But, and I think it's that people want that, right? They want there to be like that one thing, that one magic pill, that one dietary change you need to make, whatever. But the truth is that like, this was in my experience, like once you sort of tip over the edge, right, into the autoimmunity spectrum where your nervous system is really just like fried, you have to hit multiple points. You have to hit the physical body. You have to bring down inflammation. You have to work on the nervous system. You have to work on your mental and emotional state in order to really get progress. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Amen. I know. I always was looking for the root cause. I used to say root cause, like singular.
Yeah.
Until I realized,
totally.
no. We are complex beings. And like you said, maybe if someone is really in tune with their body and they're listening in the very beginning, they can address the thing.
Right.
And get results.
It's like an obvious, like, this happened and then I became ill.
Right.
Sure.
Right. But that's a rare, and like you said, even once you're in it, I'm thinking of like, there's a lot of people triggered by moldy dorm rooms in college. They were fine until they lived in their moldy, but even then, like to heal from that, you still have to do that mind body work and vagal tone and all of it. So
absolutely.
I love that. And I think it's, I'm excited for you that you were already familiar with, additional healing modalities.
Yeah. I think like my feeling is that if I hadn't been exposed to that, or that like I didn't have family who was supportive of taking a more alternative route, that it would have taken me a lot longer to get to where I am. It took me, like I said, this started about 3 years ago. And the first year I was like incredibly sick. Like I just couldn't function. The second year was like a lot of healing and a lot of setbacks. And then the third year I was like seeing much more significant progress. But all that is to say that like, if I had rejected any of those options and just gone with the strict route and not messed with anything
we wouldn't
else,
be talking.
Changed my diet. Yeah, exactly. Not only that, but like I would still be in bed, I just believe that that's the case, because I felt like stuck. Like my body felt like I was just stuck in this state of illness that came out of nowhere, and I had no way to kind of get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love
Hmm.
that I wanted to highlight because this is everybody's healing journey and it's never a straight line.
Yeah.
We'll find the things that are starting to work and we'll start improving. And there's always going to be a backslide or an obstacle or something new comes in.
Hmm.
And it's a lifelong journey. I joke,
Exactly.
people
Yeah.
say to me, well, were you misdiagnosed? Did you ever, and I'm like, I just know if I was living how I was living 20 years ago,
Hmm.
I would be diagnosable again, period. Like we're
Yeah.
constantly, our
Yeah.
bodies are constantly healing, but we're also constantly getting barraged with different things. And
Right.
so,
Yeah. New challenges.
yeah, I love that you shared that part of, we tend to make light. And so thank you for sharing that with listeners that, yeah, it's not a straight path for sure.
Yeah, and this is actually, it really hits home for me because when it was just like my mentality before about work, about life in general, that was like, there's a problem, find solution, fix it, move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah,
And that's even how conventional medicine is mostly practiced now. It's like find the problem, diagnose the problem, get the treatment, surgery, pill, whatever, move on to the next thing. And so I was just like hardwired to be like, that's how this is going to be. I have to
right,
find the solution, find the solution. And it took me like over a year to like just even let that go. And like
yeah,
letting that go was so integral in
healing.
me healing at all. Just like on a mental, like so simple. It seems like such a simple concept, but it's really not, because you're like this fear center in your brain is like, no, I must get a diagnosis on paper. I must
Right.
have, the proper medication, whatever. I must find a treatment method. And it wasn't until I let go of this idea about getting diagnosed and, that I needed to know all these specifics about what was going wrong with me that I felt better at all.
Yeah.
Which is counterintuitive. Most of my friends were like, you still haven't gotten a diagnosis? Like, you need
Right.
to go see this doctor or this doctor. And I'm like, no, I'm
I
not
say
doing
it's
that anymore.
one less thing for you to work on is,
Exactly.
you don't
Yeah.
identify with a diagnosis. So
Mhm.
nobody has to change that. You don't have to change
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
So that's amazing. Let's talk about food. I love that you said, you've always loved cooking.
Hmm.
And even that is a perspective shift, I think, for a lot of people
Yeah, for sure.
when they enter into a healing journey. If people didn't always love cooking and our relationship with food can be so complicated.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
so I want to talk a little bit about, maybe even you can share some tips on how people can change their relationship with cooking.
Yeah, totally. No.
Some people
Mhm.
think like, well, that means I'm already in pain and exhausted. So how am I going
Yep.
to spend all day in the kitchen? Or so let's wherever you want to go with food, but let's start, I guess, high level. And what is your perspective on what people should be eating?
Yeah. I think it's quite simple, yet we've overcomplicated it to the nth degree with all of the like hardcore food influencers on social media and like the million different diets and all the studies about all these different diets. It's like just eat actual food, real food, single ingredient, organic, whole food. Like that is the answer. So whether that if you want to be a vegetarian, that's going to be, like whole grains, single ingredient, unprocessed foods, rice, beans, vegetables, produce, fruits and vegetables. And if you want to lean more on like the animal based side, you're going to be including a lot of like high quality animal proteins, grass fed beef, pasture raised chicken, pasture raised eggs, wild caught fish, etc. It's like my approach is avoid things in boxes, things in, jars that have multiple ingredients, things in bags. I know that's like jarring for a lot of people to hear because
Right. Right.
because they're like, oh, well, what about my, healthy seed oil free chips? And like, sure, that's still a better option than like your standard, canola oil potato chip, but it's still like a processed food. And even this is a bit what the like there's even like the energetics of food. It's like get the food, the single ingredients, and make something in your kitchen. Like, and you were talking about how, some folks obviously have like a resistance to cooking, or they don't have any experience with it, or they just don't enjoy
Mhm.
it or whatever. But I think it's essential that we know how to cook for ourselves. And this sort of like, in our society, we've divorced ourselves so heavily from our natural state, our natural world, that we don't even know how to prepare food for ourselves anymore. That's
Right.
like, that's so mind bending if you really just think about it at a simple level. It's like we have to outsource, our food to delivery, eating out, or, buying something that's completely kind of pre-made, pre-processed because we work so much, or whatever the case may be. But it's like a fundamental thing. You know how to cook.
Yes.
You don't have to, be a gourmet chef. It's again cooking very simple things like using olive oil, salt, and pepper to season your food. It sounds bland, sounds boring, but if you have a really good, high quality piece of produce from like a local farmer's market, the taste is like gonna blow your mind in comparison to some like old tomato from the grocery store that's
It's come
white
from really far
and
away.
cold inside. Exactly.
Yeah. And your
So
taste
my,
buds
yeah,
adjust when
right,
you shift to a whole
right.
real food diet. I remember as my like favorite um, client quote, I remember I was working with a woman who was probably about 2 weeks in to eating real, only
Hmm.
real whole foods or really minimally processed, if at
Sure.
all. And she was like, have strawberries always been this sweet? Like she couldn't believe it.
Right.
She said, I
The
used to put
sweet
sugar on
receptors.
strawberries,
Wow.
because
Yeah.
so really like
Yeah.
stick with it and simple always wins. Like
Hmm.
I grew up, we had a restaurant. Like I
Hmm.
love in New Jersey. I went to the best
Hmm.
restaurants in New York growing up. Like I love great food.
Same.
And listen to Jeanine, like,
Yeah.
olive oil, salt, and pepper will make and it will bring out the
Hmm.
flavors. I'm not saying you can't use other things, but
Right.
start simple. Um,
Hmm.
you know, like it doesn't have to be hours in the kitchen every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, mostly about sourcing and again, the single ingredient concept. So if you want a sauce on your vegetables, don't buy the sauce that from the bottle that has 40 ingredients on it. Make a simple sauce with olive oil, tomato, salt, garlic, right? I think the other thing, like my advantage was I grew up, my family's Italian, and
I could
a
tell just
lot of
from your
cooks in the kitchen.
ingredients.
And yeah, we ate a lot of pasta, and maybe, for some people, gluten is not going to be a good fit, but
Sure.
it went back to that focus on single ingredient, simple recipe, whole foods, and the food was always phenomenal. Like my grandmother
Yeah.
is the best cook I know. Her food is better than any like Michelin star restaurant I've been to because it's
Sure.
simple, and these
Yep.
are like it's like peasant style Italian cooking, like Southern
Yeah.
Italian. It's just the best.
That's funny. That was what I was picturing when you were talking was,
Yeah. Hmm.
somebody in Italy making,
Yeah.
this delicious, simple meal. And I always say, if you can't have the pasta, we can everybody has emotions tied to food, memories
Right.
tied to
Hmm.
food, different, family recipes.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I make a grain-free, dairy-free noodle kugel that people wouldn't know. You know what I
Delicious.
mean? Like you can always
Yeah.
find, yeah,
Yeah.
the ingredients are a lot different than they were 30 years ago. Because I won't, even aside from just even the amount of sugar and whatever that was in some of those recipes, but you can recreate dishes and it's always the flavor profile, or sometimes it's a texture, but find out what it is about that dish that makes you feel warm and fuzzy and recreate it differently in a way that supports your body. I think also we've lost this food as nourishment
Exactly.
concept.
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Like, and so getting back to that really will help change our relationship with food, but also really help us heal.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're sort of in this food as like entertainment almost
Yeah.
world slash it's like
Sport.
a trigger, right? It's like
Right.
it's like a point of anxiety for people. But
Yeah.
traditional cultures, they don't have any of that. It's nourishment, whether it's nourishing, the on the cellular level, or it's nourishing your mental and emotional health to enjoy something that's delicious or cook with your family. I think too, like I find that a lot of clients, they don't have time to cook, or they don't really know how to cook, and therefore they don't enjoy it. I really like encourage them to just do their best to turn that around and be like, okay, I'm going to learn a new skill. I'm going to learn how to basically like support myself at the most foundational level by preparing food for myself. But I'm also going to like lose the weight, get healthier, feel better, have more energy to tackle all these other things that are challenging me. And like I said, for me, cooking, being in the kitchen is like quiet time. It's therapeutic. I can kind of shut off the racing mind. And I think that's probably the like second biggest issue that people have is the constantly racing
Oh,
mind and sort of
sure.
anxiety. So I try and get them to like carve out some time, maybe do meal prep if that's what, is going to work with their schedule. But that's like almost like a meditative therapeutic time for them versus like, oh, I have to do this thing that I don't want to do. You know what I
I
mean?
love
I
that.
just, yeah, it's like,
Well,
because
and
that's how
it
it always has been. We're like hardwired to be able to do this.
sure, and it's such a way of showing our body love,
Hmm.
right? If we
Hmm.
can get in, like get past that resistance of it's a chore. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, I get to nourish myself.
Hmm.
I think that that's really, and then there's so many different resistances, and what I would call, let's myth bust a little bit about
Hmm.
cooking. For listeners that don't love cooking or don't know how, or didn't grow up with the Italian
Hmm.
grandma that cooks amazing simple food.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things I hear all the time, you mentioned organic produce, you mentioned, high quality protein, grass
Hmm.
fed, wild caught,
Hmm.
because these things are really important. Um, the first resistance I hear all the time is money. Well, that's
Cost.
expensive.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I want to just tell me what you see, and I'll share what I see in practice as far as uh, it can be, for sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes, sometimes the organic produce is less expensive. So always check, number
Yeah,
one.
for
But
sure. Yeah.
I think we have this idea in our heads, that if we're not tallying, are you going to the Starbucks drive-through? Are you ordering? People don't
Hmm.
seem to recognize how much money they're spending on the
Hmm.
stuff that's making them sick. And that's usually the first argument I hear is financial. How about
Yeah.
you? And do you
Yeah,
agree with me that it doesn't have to be actually more expensive?
I agree. I don't think it's more expensive. I think once you start to get like that sort of department cleaned up, then a lot of other things fall into place too. And you might stop spending money on, I don't know, going out a lot, buying a lot of drinks, like other things like that. I think just in terms of like your time at the actual grocery store, like I would prioritize buying like your proteins the highest quality you can, because let's call it a dirty like animal based protein is not what you want to purchase. Like you
Industrial,
want to skip
what,
it if that's, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like why just the fact that they use the word industrial in front of any of our food, like that should be a clue right
It's an
there.
industrial chicken.
What,
Yeah.
ew.
Totally ew. Um Case like you can't afford a grass-fed steak, like totally get that. Don't get the steak,
Right.
opt for pasture raised eggs for protein, and maybe some like beans, legumes, and soak them, right? There's cheaper protein sources, certainly. And being a little bit more vegetarian can be beneficial in that way. I think also if you don't want to buy like all organic, just stick with, the dirty dozen, like
Yes.
buy those organic and leave everything else on your list, just to conventional produce wise. But I totally agree. Like people are, going out or they're buying like a sweet treat or they're stopping by Starbucks and they're spending like an enormous amount of money. I went the other day to Starbucks and I got like a venti iced coffee and it was like eight something. And I was like, what is happening? Like
Yeah,
it's shocking.
there's a few employees at the clinic that always, that always have, whether it's Starbucks or a different coffee shop, some kind of big coffee on their desk. And it's like, how can they afford that? Like, I run payroll. I don't know how they can afford that,
Yeah,
And they
totally.
would be the same people who would say, I can't afford, to eat whole real food. And it's like, well, actually, let's sit down and crunch some numbers,
I actually like just talked about this in an Instagram post the other day. I think people are like, I need to treat myself, right? I want to,
Yeah.
it's much more of like just the mental, like, no, this is my special treat that I have every morning is my sugary coffee
I
or
start
whatever
my
it is.
day with sugar.
Yes. And
Yeah,
like this
exactly.
is what I need because I have a very high intensity job and a stressful life and I need to be able to treat myself, right? And like I totally get that mentality. I respect that. But maybe treating yourself is again, like how can we reframe treating yourself from buying something that's actually making you sick to treating yourself as getting something that's going to be nourishing for your body. So
Yes.
instead, is it like an herbal tea or homemade coffee? I just got really into this because I can't do like a full caffeine coffee. So I do
Mhm.
a half calf and it has like a functional mushroom blend in it. And I'm just,
Yes.
oh, it's the best. And it's
Yeah.
expensive. It's $20 for a bag of this coffee, but like it lasts me forever. I don't drink it every day. And it's better
It's a
than
treat
a
that supports your
Starbucks.
body. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a nourishing
Yeah.
treat instead of, and it
Right.
doesn't have to be an either or. It can hit the pleasure center and be good for you.
Yes.
It really can.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
know it totally can. And I think like kind of back to what you were saying before, after a period of time of eating more of a clean, like whole foods diet,
Mhm.
those ultra processed foods, fast foods, they don't taste good.
No.
They immediately make you feel bad, but they also just like they don't taste good. Your brain recognizes like this isn't food. This is something else.
Yeah. And I would say
Yeah.
there's an adjustment period. I was thinking
Mhm.
of coffee, and coffee is one of those for people that
Yeah.
do drink coffee.
You need
Um,
it.
it's just a funny, like, don't people don't like when I mess with their coffee, and pretty
I'm
much
sure.
if you're not already drinking it black or bulletproof or I'm going to mess with
Yeah.
your coffee for a little while.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a funny thing. Like we have this thing about our coffee, and I'll say whenever you make any change, I used to like my coffee literally to taste like melted ice cream, like
Yeah.
sweet and light was how I grew
Yeah.
up.
Hmm.
On Sundays I would put whipped cream in it as a kid.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not that I'm saying kids should drink coffee, but it was the
A
70s. It was different.
lot of kids are drinking coffee now because they're so tired all the time.
Well, which is a whole nother
Whole other
interview.
thing.
Wait.
Yeah, totally.
But what I will offer is this for listeners: when you make a good change, understand it is going to take a little time. You're not going to go from putting cream and sugar in your coffee to a healthier version of coffee and love it the first time. It's really unlikely until you like you said, are on that whole food diet and you're not getting hit with all these artificial sweeteners or just tons of sugar. So if you go into it with realistic expectations, I think that's important to give yourself like, okay, I know I may not love this in the beginning. I'm going to stick with it and see.
Yeah, and it's you usually, you have some kind of greater why. Like you're
Yeah.
dealing with a lot of fatigue, or you've got some new diagnosis, like, or PCOS, something with your hormones is off, whatever, the case may be. That's
Yeah.
why you're going down this journey in the first place. So just, I always, recommend to clients, like, come back to your why, do your best to stick with something for, the period of time that you've sort of committed to, right? Like, commit to yourself and don't break your promise to yourself. I think that's like such a difficult thing in coaching in general. That's
Sure.
like, you can give them all the info, you can tell them about the food, you can give them a meal plan. But at the end of the day, like, what's the big thing that's holding people back is like they're breaking those kind of commitments to themselves
Sure.
because whatever their stress load is out of control. They're not happy with some personal life aspect, outside of, sticking with the
Yeah.
diet. Like,
Or they're not used to
so yeah,
prioritizing themselves either.
right.
I
Also
don't
true.
know.
Yeah. They're used to
Uh,
prioritizing work
Work,
or
family,
kids.
others,
Yeah.
like all
Mhm.
all the things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that. Do you have any tips for people who are interested in, like, they're like, yeah, I know I shouldn't be eating all this other junk and I don't know how to
Mhm.
cook. Do you have any tips for easy, enjoyable ways for people to cook or enjoy vegetables if they're not already, like people say to
Yeah.
me, oh, I have a plant-based diet. And I'm like, well, I do too. I just also eat meat with it. Like, we
Yeah.
should all have a plant-based
Plant-based.
diet.
Exactly.
But a lot of people just either didn't grow up with veggies or they were canned
Yeah.
and not, so do you
Totally.
have
Yeah.
is there a simple way we can enjoy
Yeah.
vegetables to learn to
I
form a
think,
new relationship?
yeah, there's a couple things that just like come top of mind. One, and this is actually really good for kids too, like to bring your kids in to this process and kind of get them more into vegetables is like the colors. Simple, like eat the rainbow of vegetables, right? When you go to the store, pick like one of each color,
Love that.
whether it's be like fruits or vegetables, and get them into like the whole rainbow of foods, right? Because what do these like big food companies do? They put a ton of dye in the
Right.
foods to make them colored. We already have it.
Right. But not
Like,
Skittles.
it's already there. We just like manufactured this fake version for whatever reason. But anyways, so I think that's one thing. The second thing is like bringing in fermented foods, like fermented vegetables. There's
Ah,
all different kinds of like krauts out there. I recently got this great like a fermented seaweed dish with like sesame. I forget the name of the brand offhand, but it was at like a fresh market. It was so good. So bringing in some kind of like fermented vegetable, and then I was talking before about like sauce.
mhm,
So just like amping it up with this with some kind of sauce. One thing I do a lot with like kales, like collard greens, sort of like a leafy green, almost
mhm.
like a creamed spinach. I use coconut milk instead, and
Nice.
like I use olive oil and butter, and you like cook it down really slow and kind of like reduce it, and it really is like a creamed spinach dish. It's
Yeah.
freaking delicious.
I can, you're making my mouth water. One of my favorite
It's
things. I'll
so
probably do
good.
it for Thanksgiving too.
Exactly. It's like
It,
the, collard greens with the cream,
yeah.
but like it's coconut and you really can't tell. Yeah.
Danielle Walker has a recipe
Hmm.
for a spinach artichoke dip that I'll
Hmm.
make. It takes a little work. I wouldn't start there,
Yeah.
listeners. I usually will make it when there's a family gathering,
Hmm.
Thanksgiving or
Yeah.
something like that. But people have no idea it has no dairy in it. It's that
Yeah.
good. So
Yeah.
I think opening your mind to
Yeah.
experimenting with some of these alternatives, and a lot of the
Hmm.
stuff that people will make out of a box, like isn't hard to make from scratch. Like we're just
No,
so
it's maybe
trained
one
to
step
think.
more, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're trained, like we have this idea, we've been brainwashed to think like, oh, it's going to take us 3 hours to do this thing, and
Hmm.
it, like you said, it's usually just one additional step.
Right. And
Yeah.
I mean, cooking is like anything else. There's some practice involved. So maybe the first time, like if you really have never cooked like anything, like let's say you've never made like a full dish, like you'll make like little snacks or whatever, but you've never really cooked. It might take you 3 hours to make something like a little more complex the first time, but you might also like really enjoy the experience. And then the next time you make it, you only need to get like a few dishes that you're like, okay, I'm really good at making these things. I can bring them to dinners, like events, whatever. And then if I need like a go-to, I don't know, date night dinner at home, you have these like great, impressive, healthy dishes. So yeah, not complicated. I do like share recipes with my newsletter every other week, and I do a lot of like plant-based, how to make vegetables sexier.
I like that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so much fun. So we're at the point of the podcast where listeners know to expect this question. What is one step that listeners can take starting today to improve their health? And it could be anything. It's always a tough question.
Yeah. I'm going to go off the topic of food and jump into something else. So in my own coaching program, I have like a 6-pillar sort of approach. And the first thing I do is actually not food, it's sleep. I think that dialing in, fixing your sleep is the most important thing that you can do to reset your health. It was integral for me in my own healing process. So I'd say one of the easiest ways that you can start to reset your circadian rhythm, this is simple, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen this already, but it's get outside, get sun in your eyes first thing. So don't scroll the phone, don't check the news, don't check your emails, don't have coffee, go outside, look at the sun. I mean, no, not directly, but but don't put the sunglasses on. Like, so yep. The first thing I do when I get up is I brush my teeth, go to the bathroom, and then I walk my dog, like within 5 minutes of getting out of bed. It just helps to set you up properly, your circadian rhythm for the rest of the day. The proper wake up helps to support a proper wind down at the end of the day.
Yes.
And if your sleep is wrecked, doesn't matter what you eat. Truly, like,
it's
yes,
true.
those things, they work together, but that's the first thing I focus on, is sleep.
Love that. Love it. Yeah. And I think we can never say it too often either.
Yeah.
And yes, and good sleep starts first thing in the morning.
It starts in the morning. Exactly. Yep. And I think this definitely like my own issue with, when my sleep does get a little off, it's like, if I try and fix it by starting with okay, I'll go to bed early tonight thing, that doesn't work. Right. I have to do it the opposite way, by getting up early, going with the sun, waiting to have my coffee. All the proper steps in the morning are really the only way to reset it. So,
amen. I love it. Jeanine, for people listening on the go that aren't going to check the show notes, where's the best place to find you? Yeah,
definitely. So my Instagram is wellspace. It's well_space. And then I actually recently have been working on a second Instagram. It's called Feel Your Chi, because I also teach Qigong, which is like a whole side thing. Yeah. And then my website is wellspace.coach.
Awesome. Love it. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing your journey with us.
Of course. It was really nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me on.
For everyone listening, remember you can get those show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. Hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.